Happy Friday, Dog Nation. Welcome into DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Kroger. Many of you enjoying kind of the end of your spring break week. If you are, thanks for making us a part of it. And if many of you are getting ready to enjoy some golf here throughout the weekend with the Augusta National and the Masters, obviously UGA guys continuing to roll on there. We certainly appreciate you spending some time with us in all of that, too. Fun show for us. Jeff Sintel, UGA Recruiting. A little bit of a look, speaking of recruiting, at some of the five-star guys that are expecting to do big things for Georgia here this season. That's all on the way over the course of the next couple of minutes. Also, really interesting stuff from a member of that Georgia secondary about the addition of Tykee Smith. We'll do that before we're done, and we'll celebrate a nice UGA baseball. Diamond Dogs getting a victory over Vanderbilt yesterday in surprising fashion, a game many of you watched on the SEC network. So we'll have a lot of fun here on a Friday. I am so glad to have you with us. DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
If you will allow me to, I want to begin today's show by briefly revisiting an old topic as a way of setting up a new topic. You may remember that yesterday on the show, for those of you that had a chance to hear yesterday's show, we played some audio from veteran college football writer Andy Staples talking about Georgia and its comparison with Florida in the SEC East. And there was something that Staples said in the midst of that conversation that we didn't make too big of a deal about yesterday that I do kind of want to expand on a little bit today, because I think that what Staples says, without necessarily meaning to necessarily, I think one of the things that Staples says here really demonstrates one of the narratives that exists around Kirby Smart, something we've talked about before, but kind of needs to be addressed here once again. This is Andy Staples from yesterday, and listen to what he says happens if Georgia doesn't win the SEC East this year and doesn't take a step towards competing for the college football playoff. This speaks to the pressure that it kind of exists around UGA. Take a listen to this.
Let's say Florida wins the East. Florida beats them in Jacksonville. Then they should start getting pretty mad. They should start saying, okay, what are we doing here? But I really do think things set up pretty well for them.
So I think this is really interesting that he says, hey, if Georgia doesn't win the SEC East, at that point in time, you should be really worried. At that point in time, you should be saying, hey, what's going on here at Georgia? What's the problem? And to a certain extent, Georgia fans will be saying that. But I think that you know here that if Georgia were to somehow falter this season and not be back in a major way, competing for the college football playoff, it won't just be Georgia fans who are asking what's going on here. There'll be a lot of seizing and pouncing going on. A lot of opposing fans. In some cases, this will be media looking to pounce on Georgia for, hey, what's going on there at Georgia? How come Kirby Smart's such a good recruiter, but not getting it done on the field? And it's not because necessarily there's pockets of the media that's anti-Kirby or anti-Georgia. I just think there's a degree of boredom that sets in with things that once we kind of get used to a story, we either want that story to take the next step in the narrative, or we want something new to happen. Media just kind of gets bored. I think that to a degree there's a level of boredom that exists with Kirby Smart and what's going on here at Georgia. Either go ahead and win a national championship, or in some cases there's going to be just questions asked by folks in the media because they just kind of get bored with things kind of moving along at the pace that it might be moving, deliberate as it might seem to some of them. And there's also like the not media type here, but like the SEC fan who looks in on what's going on at Georgia and says, and you've all heard like 1,000 versions of this, right? It's always some version of, Bama fan on a message board, something along those lines, saying, Georgia gets all them 5 stars, but what do they do with them once they get them? And there's a lot of that's out there about, hey, what happens to these 5 stars once they get to Georgia? And this is one of those things where I just think it's objectively true that people wonder what happens to the 5 stars once they get to Georgia? What happens to them after that? Here's what I don't think people have fully appreciated. Most of those 5 stars, a great number of those 5 stars anyway, that Kirby Smart has recruited over the course of the last few years, folks, they're still at Georgia, and they're coming to their own this season, many of them junior seasons, the kind of spot where you expect the dominant season to take place, the trajectory to kind of, fully come to fruition. All of a sudden, guys who've been promising prospects all of a sudden become dominant forces. For a lot of these 5-star guys that Georgia has brought in, recruiting headlines they've earned along the way towards doing that, for a lot of those guys, this is the year in which it may all come together in a very big way. So I think it's appropriate we talk defense here for a moment, because that's where a lot of these guys are. And let's face it, we've been fixated on the offensive side of the ball in many ways with good reasons for Georgia, because of what you think may happen with JT Daniels in his first full season as Georgia starter, and kind of what happens after the injury to George Pickens and all these stuff, kind of related to all of that. College football has in many ways become an offensive game, so it makes sense that we would have talked so much with the offense. But when you really look at the stuff that's going on defense, or the preview of what might be going on for Georgia defensively here this fall, it is really worth spending a few minutes on a day like this. And it is very, very appropriate to say that a lot of the nucleus of this defense here for Georgia this upcoming season, many of those guys will themselves be former five-star recruits. And people wonder, what happens to all them five-stars once they get to Georgia? You're about to find out, maybe here in 2021, what happens to those five stars once they get to Georgia, once they go through the strength and conditioning, once they learn everything that Kirby Smart, Dan Lanning wants them to do defensively. You're about to find out, maybe if you're not a Georgia fan, if you're a Bama fan or an Auburn fan or a Florida fan or whomever else, you're about to find out what happens to many of these five stars once they get to Georgia. They may be ready to blossom right there before your eyes. One of those guys in particular I want to talk about for a moment is Nakobe Dean, five-star linebacker who is not going through spring practice right now. He's overcoming a little bit of a shoulder injury. I'm always fascinated when Kirby Smart, I've told you this before, when Smart brings either something up that's unsolicited, when he's asked about one thing and says another, or when Smart is clearly ready to answer a question without any kind of hesitation. I'm always interested in that because it seems to sort of demonstrate something. And let me give you an example when Kirby Smart met with reporters last week. The question with Kirby is, hey, with everything going on defense, who's your leader right now on defense? Listen to how quickly Kirby Smart is able to say who the clear leader of the Georgia defense is right now, even though it's a guy that's not currently practicing here this spring. I think there's something to be taken from this from Kirby Smart. Take a listen.
Who is the field general on the defense right now?
Well, Nakobe's the field general. He's not out there, So you say, who is it? It's done by committee. It's, when you don't have a really good player out there, it allows other people to step up.
So listen, we talked about this with Terrence Edwards a little bit yesterday. It's undoubtedly true that part of the reason why Smart is so quickly able to answer Nakobe Dean in a question like that is because the position that Dean plays as that inside linebacker, he's got extra responsibilities, things like that. So to a degree, we kind of understand that. Yet there's a lot of different ways that Kirby Smart could have taken that question. And yet when he was asked, to use the phrase the questioner used, who's your field general, Smart didn't take 1 second to think, who is my field general? Well, Nakobe Dean is obviously the field general, but he's not out there right now. Boy, that's a pretty nice compliment for a guy that's not currently going through spring practice. And by the way, Dean's one of these former five-star guys who's been good in his career at Georgia up to this point in time, a tackling machine in many ways for Georgia in his sophomore season of 2020. But if Smart's saying those kinds of things now about a guy who's not even able to practice here this spring, my gosh, folks, how good does he have a chance to be for this upcoming junior season? Well, Smart went into some more detail during his press conference last Saturday about exactly what is happening for Dean while he's not able to practice. And I'm telling you right now, you listen to this kind of stuff from Kirby, you are really left to believe sky could clearly be the limit for a guy like Dean, one of these former five-star guys. Take a listen to this.
Nakobe still takes walkthrough reps. He takes every minute rep. I've never had a player probably in all my career coaching that was more engaged. You have to stay on certain guys when they're injured to stay engaged. Nakobe's calling things out. Like he's playing linebacker every play and making the call from the sideline. You can hear him. He's engaged. He's on top of it. And plus he gets reps in individual and walkthrough. So I feel good about the work he's putting in.
I mean, I'm sorry. That sounds like a player I very much want to see more of here this fall. If that's the kind of command and control that Dean has over the situation on that defense, the clear field general, and if he's getting a chance to learn, because I think one of the things we misunderstand sometimes is the benefit that can be gained when you're not going through the physical part of football, when you're able to solely focus on the mental part. I'm not saying it's a good thing that Dean's injured and not playing, but it can be a pretty valuable asset to be able to learn without having to think about the physical things that you have to do. You can learn by watching, and Dean getting a chance to do that, but he's not just a spectator to these practices, as Kirby Smart just said there. That's a former five-star who is going to be a big part of the Georgia defense here this season. If you wonder how good the Georgia defense can be, let your mind wander for a moment just along the lines of what Kirby Smart just said there about the threshold of achievement that's possible for Nakobe Dean here this upcoming season. But wait, that's not all. Did you get a chance to hear Tuesday's show here on DawgNation Daily when we had a chance to talk to the great former Georgia outside linebacker Azeez Ojulari? Ojulari had a gigantic year sacking the quarterback for Georgia this past season. He's going to be a first-round pick in this year's NFL draft because of that. But when Azeez Ojulari looks at what's left at Georgia, now that he's gone, Azeez does not see an outside linebacker room that's hurting for talent. He sees guys like Nolan Smith, Adam Anderson, both, by the way, former five-star recruits who he thinks can have very big seasons. In fact, he gives you a statistical parameter for one of these two guys, which I think is pretty interesting. He also mentions Robert Beal here, there as well. So if you want to keep the conversation going about five-star recruits powering this Georgia defense for this upcoming season, Azeez Ojulari gave you some real ammunition for that on Tuesday's show. This is Azeez.
Yeah, I expect them to dominate, definitely for sure. Next season coming up, I expect them to dominate. The standard is there for them to set and go after it, and, you know, all the boys could play. So Rob, definitely, I expect Rob to get out there, make big plays. Nolan Smith for sure. And I know Adam is on a different level. I believe Adam throw up some crazy numbers up there. I believe Adam can get in the double digits of sacks, and Nolan too. So it should be a great time watching those boys. I can't wait to watch them play.
I mean, how much do you love the thought of that? Azeez Ojulari saying, oh, yeah, I definitely could see Adam Anderson getting double-digit sacks, and I could see Nolan Smith doing the same thing. As I said before, both former five-star recruits. I'm telling you, this is a really interesting situation, and I'm not going to downplay the issues, the Georgia secondary, the need to find cornerbacks, the need to get some help there on the heels of losing so many people off the roster from last year's team, so many players that were big-time contributors. I'm not saying that's not an issue. But sometimes when you look at what's right with the Georgia defense, man, it really makes what's not quite right with the Georgia defense seem a lot less significant. I mean, doesn't it? When you talk about five-star guys like Nakobe Dean and Adam Anderson and Nolan Smith all earning their own level of praise from guys like Azeez Ojulari and Terrence Edwards from yesterday's show and Kirby Smart going last week, makes you really feel good. And then I'll just quickly say this. Isn't it interesting that I just spent however many minutes talking about these guys, and I didn't even mention Trayvon Walker. But if you go back and listen to Kirby Smart, way from the beginning of the spring, he was talking about Walker being one of those guys that when you look at the productivity from Azeez Ojulari, not here, it was Kirby Smart said, hey, listen, don't forget Trayvon Walker in that situation there as well, even though from a position standpoint, he's obviously a little bit different than what Azeez Ojulari brought to the table. That is a really, really fun thing to consider. The Georgia defense could be in very good hands. A lot of folks who wonder, what happens to all those five stars once they get to Georgia? Well, they're still here. Many of them are. And many of them could be on the verge of breakout seasons. And won't that be fun to watch later on this fall? My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger, and glad to have you with us no matter how. You get to us today live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, all kinds of video platforms, podcast platforms all over the place as well, Apple, Google, Spotify, worldfamousdawgnation.com, everything else all the way around there. Just really happy to have you with us. Our friends on the radio, of course, in Athens on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. So much fun to be a part of the program with you, no matter how you're getting to us. And a big thanks to Kroger for making it all possible. One of the things I love about Kroger right now is the way in which they make the shopping experience easier, more convenient. When you have family and everybody's busy, and obviously over the course of the last year, so healthy and safe, also one of those things that's been heavy on our mind. Anything that our friends at Kroger can do to make it easier has just been certainly a huge blessing. Well, how about the kind of the next step in all of that? And many of you have taken advantage of this, the chance at free pickup. You can shop online, you can choose a pickup time that's convenient for you. Kroger's going to carefully select all your items for your particular order, and they're going to bring it out right there to your car for you. It's just an unbelievable deal. You can go to Kroger.com, find out a whole lot more about this on those orders of $35 or more, and be a part of a free pickup from our friends at Kroger. A very, very good thing. Taking good care of you, picking out great items for you, and giving you a chance to sort of drive up at whatever time you choose, have that stuff delivered right there to you. Really good stuff. Kroger pickup. Make sure you check that out here today. All right, it's Jeff Sintel talking some UGA recruiting here coming up in just a little bit. We'll kind of get into a lot of the recruiting news, including a really interesting piece that Jeff wrote on the big name for the class of 2023, Lebbeus Overton. We'll do that with Jeff Sintel here coming up in just a moment. Before that, though, I do want to go around the doghouse here today. And I mentioned a moment ago the issue with the Georgia secondary, and it is clearly one of those issues that has to be addressed, no matter how much you may enjoy the idea of a lot of these former 5 stars in the front 7, what they may do for Georgia this season. It doesn't mean that you don't have concern about what's going to happen for the Georgia secondary. And Georgia took a big step towards fixing some of those issues or addressing some of those concerns when you brought in Tykee Smith, former All-American defensive back out of the West Virginia program, a guy that was Thorpe Award semifinals. By now, you're fairly familiar with the resume that Tykee Smith brings to UGA. Well, this week it was interesting to hear from Georgia safety Chris Smith, one of those guys that will potentially be playing alongside Tykee Smith here this season. And obviously, Chris Smith, speaking on behalf of the rest of the Georgia secondary, certainly sounds like Christopher and the rest of his crew very glad to have Tykee Smith in the fold. This is what Christopher Smith said about his new teammate Tykee Smith a little earlier this week.
I mean, I talked to him a little bit before he committed, and then on the day he committed, I just congratulated him and welcomed him to the family. A little bit of film I have seen on him, he's a spectacular player, real physical, real great in coverage and things like that. He could definitely help our team. He's a great player.
Here's one of the things I think is really cool, that when it comes to Tykee Smith, and the fact of the matter is, you think of him as potentially a nickelback, like a star type player, but you could also potentially see him as a safety there as well. Well, safety is also Christopher Smith's position. So there are some people out there in the football world that might view the arrival of Tykee Smith as a threat to Christopher Smith or a threat to anybody else when it comes to playing time. This guy is not just here to help my team, but he's here to kind of take playing time away from me. And let's face it, that's precious. There's not enough of that to go around as it is on a deep roster like Georgia. There are some football situations out there where a guy like Tykee Smith might not quite be welcomed into a new roster by his new teammates. But you hear Christopher Smith saying there that, yeah, I did reach out to him to let him know I was glad he was here. In fact, in that same press conference, Christopher Smith went a little further into detail about the fact that, hey, there's no jealousy here or no concern about, any kind of, fight for playing time. This is about, as a team, being as good as we can be. And frankly, you love to hear that from a Georgia guy. A little more from Christopher Smith on that topic.
Well, it's fully accepted by me. I'm welcome anything that can help our team. He's one of those guys, All-American and things like that, And the competition going to be increased in the room. It's going to force all of us to play better, including him. And, we always ready to work everybody in there. So, competitiveness is the name of the game. You just got to go out there and compete day in and day out. And that's all I'm about.
I think that's really good. Great stuff from a guy named Christopher Smith, who I think is a good player in his own right. And the fact that a good player welcomes in another good player, even someone who's maybe to a degree a little similar to what he is, I think that's all really good stuff all the way around. So it was great to hear from Georgia safety Christopher Smith a little earlier this week. Before I say hello to Jeff Sintel, let me remind you that all of this coverage of spring practice coming from the great city of Athens, and many of you know how great Athens is. In fact, you want to live there, or you want to retire there, or you want to get an investment property there because you know how hot the real estate market is when it comes to all of that kind of stuff. Well, let me tell you this. If you get involved in Athens real estate, here's the thing you need to understand, that to have a local expert on your side, someone who knows the specific details of the Athens real estate situation, that's what you want. That's what my friends at 5 Market Realty are going to be able to provide for you. They've got expert and local knowledge of this particular market, whether it's people who want to move there, retire there, investment properties, everything else. Game day condos, kind of a hot thing right now. They can do that for you. Airbnb properties, for those of you that love the idea of taking advantage of that and making some, investment money related to all that. You get a chance to do that if you're looking for a property in Athens. My friends at 5 Market Realty are the ones that know it all from the, all of across the board of what's available to you there. So website to go to, it's 5mrealty.com, 5mrealty.com. 5 Market Realty was one of the 2021 Bulldog 100 lists. So these are good dog people. They love UGA football. They'll talk Georgia football with you, but most importantly, they'll talk about the city of Athens with you, the hot spots to live, the best places to invest, those game day condos. What a cool thing that is, kind of that you can take advantage of right now. Just really good stuff with my friends at 5 Market Realty. So please check them out online. 5M Realty. That's number 5. 5mrealty.com, and they can set you up here today. All right, it's great to have you with us on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. There is a lot going on with UGA recruiting, so we want to kind of touch on all of that, and we'll kind of take a look at what could happen next as the 2022 cycle rolls on here, and some 2023 news there as well. So it's Jeff Sintel here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. Glad to have you with us as well.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
We'll say hello to Jeff Sintel here. And, Jeff, I want to talk a lot of recruiting with you, obviously, here on this Friday. But I do want to bring you in on a discussion I was just having before you came on that I don't think a lot of the non-Georgia fans quite realize this. They sort of wonder, what happens to all those 5-star recruits once they get to UGA. And I don't think people have fully appreciated how many of those guys are actually still here. And that when you look at a Georgia defense that wants to match, with the very best offenses in the country for this upcoming season, and obviously there's legitimate questions in UGA secondary. But as I talked a good bit about before you joined us, when you think about Nakobe Dean and Adam Anderson and Nolan Smith and Trayvon Walker, to have these former 5-star guys who serve as the nucleus there in the front seven for this defense, I think that's potentially a very exciting recipe. We had Azeez Ojulari, as you know, in our show earlier this week. He predicted the potential of double-digit sacks for both Anderson and for Nolan. Kirby Smart's praised Nakobe Dean for his leadership. Trayvon Walker just seems to be able to do a little bit of everything. What an interesting group for Georgia this upcoming season, right?
Yeah. Good morning to you, Brandon. That's a meaty topic with a lot of stuff on the bone. I think I would call this a validation year, but also there's going to be a lot of kind of like benchmarks to watch. Like everybody's wondering, why hasn't Nolan Smith acted like the number one player in the country? Why hasn't Adam Anderson acted like and played like and had the snaps of a 5-star outside linebacker in the 2018 class? And I think largely that reason is due to Azeez Ojulari. So if Azeez Ojulari, remember, Georgia had so many players, Jermaine Johnson, Azeez Ojulari, Nolan Smith, Adam Anderson, Robert Beal, that kind of was one of the reasons why Brenton Cox quickly just decided there was a better place for him than in Athens, just the amount of depth that had been stacked up in the 2017, 18, and 19 classes. And then you've got simply, I think, a lot of dominoes, Brandon. Azeez Ojulari gets picked in the first round, then everybody can go, oh, okay, that's why those guys weren't playing. He was an all-SEC player. And then I think the number to hit for Georgia is about 30 sacks. If you can see, and it's kind of odd because I'm going to go across 3 names, and one of them's not even at Georgia. One of them is Jermaine Johnson at Florida State. One of them is Adam Anderson and Nolan Smith at Georgia. You put all those guys together, and if all of a sudden those guys put together about 30 sacks, which I think that is highly likely that those guys can get 30 sacks. I mean, Jermaine Johnson might get 6 in a game against a Wake Forest or a North Carolina State playing in the Atlantic Coast Conference. So, I just think a lot of people are going to see validation from a lot of those guys. Brandon, you bring up all those 2018 and 2019 names, and a lot of those guys are going to be draft eligible. And really, you're looking, past the 2021 season, a lot of these guys had to wait their turn. Like Monty Rice was here, Tay Crowder was here. Both of those guys fulfilled the reason why maybe a Channing Tindall, maybe a Nakobe Dean wasn't everywhere on every snap during their first 2 seasons at Georgia. But I think this is really what the kids would call a bag year or a money year for a lot of these guys to really make their resumes for the NFL.
And listen, I would never try to sell people on the idea that all 4 of those names we just talked about, Anderson, Nolan, Trayvon Walker, Nakobe Dean, they're not all 4 going to be superstars. But boy, Jeff, it seems hard for me to imagine that at least one of them, maybe more than one of them, could not have that kind of big time, top shelf type of year. And, around these parts, we've seen what happens when all of a sudden the guy just kind of, puts a team on his back. And you give me that quartet of names of having at least one guy emerging from that as a household name within SEC circles by the end of the season. All of a sudden, the entire fortunes of this Georgia defense are just changed by that.
Yeah, I mean, and what's, Brandon, part of it is just the way we are as a culture and the way we look at the Georgia team. I mean, we're sitting here talking about Nakobe Dean maybe being a breakout. Well, it could be argued that Nakobe already was a breakout guy last year. If you look at the way he graded out, if you look at the way he was a Butkus Award semifinalist last year in his first really only year of being an exclusive, first, second, and third down player, Nakobe's always been great in pass coverage. And you've got a guy and then a guy like Walker and a guy like Nolan. Here's the big thing, Brandon. Those guys were always the young kid trying to go against older starters in the SEC. And now, by and large, they're going to be as old as anybody they go up against. And I'm really big on, no matter how talented they are, I'm really big on the 18-year-old, 19-year-old kid always being at disadvantage against a 20, 21, 22-year-old senior, especially in the trenches. And now, the older, bigger, faster, stronger, wiser player, all those guys are in at least their 3rd season at Georgia. And there's not going to be a lot of dudes that can match up with them physically, scheme-wise, football IQ. I mean, they used to be kind of playing at a disadvantage because of their age. Now there will be no disadvantages, and I think that's what gets Georgia fans excited about seeing all those guys turn loose, where they've been coached up, they've been lifted up in Sinclair's House of Pain, and they know what to do.
So I want to change the subject here and talk UGA recruiting here for a moment, including a piece that you had at DawgNation this week with Lebbeus Overton. Let's talk about pass rush, very impressive pass rusher, defensive end type out of the class of 2023. One of the things that I kind of take from your story is, I mean, it goes without saying that Georgia would be aggressive here, but just how aggressive that Georgia's looking to be to kind of make their mark with Overton. This is a very interesting prospect and one of those names I'm guessing that you and I will be talking about a lot in the months to come.
Yeah, Brandon, this guy's different. And I wasn't just kind of trying to scheme up a really nice headline to make folks click. I mean, Brandon, you and I have been doing this, I don't know, a lot of shows now, man, a lot of shows now. How often have we heard about Kirby Smart's band of black belt recruiters deciding to give a 5-star, the recruitment of a 5-star to just one player? I mean, to just one member of the staff. That's Scott Cochran with Lebbeus Overton, and you know it's a pretty smart pun on words here play because Lebbeus Overton's father is currently the athletic director at Kennesaw State, former Oklahoma lineman. His mother is a former volleyball player at Kentucky. Lots of good athletic DNA there. But he was in Tuscaloosa as an athletics administrator from 2009 to 2015. And if that's not a lot of opportunities for him to get to know Scott Cochran when he was on the Tuscaloosa staff at Alabama, I don't know what is. That might be a long-term relationship that Georgia's certainly parlaying here. And I know, Brennan, you're probably a big fan of, you want Kirby, you want Lanning, you want Trey Scott, you want everybody talking to a prospect, including Cochran. But I think this is interesting, and I think it's very calculating for a guy like Overton, man. And the other wrinkle in this very unique story is, if that wasn't enough, is the guy legitimately is going to play both sports in college. He's gotten true dual sport offers from Ohio State, North Carolina, Stanford now of all places. And I think when I wrote that piece, everybody was wondering, like, hey man, can Tom Crean get on the dog phone and give this young man can somebody send him an email or a really cool edit that says he's offered? Because that's one card everybody's going to need to have to play in terms of the chase for Lebbeus Overton. And another thing, Brandon, is he's rated as an outside linebacker, but I mean, Brandon, this guy's like a parent at Disney World, as many calories as he burns every day, man. I mean, he's 6'3.5". I don't know if he's quite 6'4". I think maybe he might have been a smidge smaller than maybe a lot of people would have thought when he was at the Under Armour camp a couple weeks ago, and he was next to a bunch of other top guys. But his production is unparalleled. 21.5 sacks as a sophomore at Milton in Georgia's 7A football, but the fact that he's an all-state caliber basketball player on a state champion 7A Milton basketball team, and Brendan, right now he's big time on the AAU schedule, playing for a team sponsored by Nike, and he has told me pretty much matter-of-factly that he's going to do both, and that's just another thing. And then the other wrinkle, Brendan, is he's 265 with all this training he does already in high school as a sophomore. You know what we say, Brendan? If a young man is already 265 pounds in high school, much less your sophomore year, that to me does not equate to being an outside linebacker, being a jack, playing out on the edge. That equates to being a very terrific, sensational type interior defensive lineman that may flex out a little bit as a 5 technique as well.
No, I think that's really interesting. Why do you think it is we're talking about basketball so much these days with a lot of these recruits? Because I don't know that trend is necessarily, across the state or the region overall in terms of, overall numbers for basketball. I mean, I hear coaches tell me sometimes they're a little bit concerned about their basketball numbers in terms of, who's coming out for the sport right now. But it seems like when it comes to the population of elite football recruits, you and I are talking about basketball more than we used to. Why do you think that is, if there is a reason at all?
The other thing, Brendan, is the big guys, which is like totally different. You don't hear a lot of receivers. You don't hear a lot of running backs. I mean, Emmanuel Henderson was one. Terrion Arnold was one, but like most of the time, that's what you would expect. But you remember Trayvon Walker, you got Lebbeus Overton now. These are a lot of guys.
Jalen Carter was a good basketball player?
Yeah, a lot of these guys are like 6'5", and what it is they're among the best athletes in their school. and they end up getting a lot of basketball time. I think if I went down my Rolodex of all the guys I've covered that are in the NFL, a lot of them low key, Brandon, think that they could have made it to the SEC level, at least in basketball. Now, whether that's true or not, we'll never know or we'll never find out. But everybody harbors the fact that they could have been great on the basketball court as well. No matter how tall they were, or no matter how great their outside shot was.
It is funny, Jeff. I've certainly heard this too. Like, I'd give anything to be as good at anything as some of these football players think they were at basketball. And I'm not saying that obviously Overton's a really good player, and a lot of guys that we've encountered are really good players. But there is no shortage of football players who are very happy to tell you how good they think they are at basketball. I'd give anything to be as good as they think they were in some of these cases.
Yeah, and it's funny, Brandon. A lot of them get around the locker room and talk, whether it's early in the morning, and they said it's either, man, I could dunk, or do you see my YouTube clips, or do you see my Instagram clips about dunking? Or now it's all about Madden, man. Everybody thinks they're a 5-star Madden player. And currently, from what I hear, there's a raging debate amongst the Georgia team about who's the best in Madden. The quarterbacks always think they're the best. The receivers always think they're the best. And the defensive players also believe they're undefeated. And it's funny, all these guys with the Georgia background, and they're at the University of Georgia, when they get on the Madden sticks, what do? They throw the ball all the time. They throw the ball all the time. It's like whatever you got, you want to do something else. That's like whatever's greener on the other side of the fence.
I got more recruiting talk with Jeff Sintel coming up. Let me quickly remind you, though, that we're only a 2-hour drive from the beautiful properties, Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort, Harrah's Cherokee Valley River. The book is open, sports gaming there in the beautiful mountains of western North Carolina. That means the big golf tournament this weekend. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. You can go up there, get some action on that if you want to, do some of that kind of stuff. Obviously, Major League Baseball is running here. You can get some, action down on that there as well. Plus, take advantage of the socially distant gaming floor, the gourmet restaurants, the world-class shopping, the really luxurious spa, all of that. Just a great getaway, whether it's the original Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort or Harrah's Cherokee Valley River. They're in western North Carolina, beautiful place to be. Website to go to, Caesars.com/Harrah's-Cherokee. That's Caesars.com/Harrah's-Cherokee. You can find out a whole lot more about Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort. Jeff, a couple of things here. First of all, let's talk about Branson Robinson. Recently put out his, list of finalists. Georgia obviously included in that. But in addition to that, I think it's kind of interesting. It seems like we got a lot of finalists drop within the last few days. I guess I'm struggling to remember all of them. I know Walter Nolan, Branson Robinson, I guess maybe as prominent as anything here. But it seems like we got a lot of guys dropping a list of finalists kind of right there on us on the last week. Was there any kind of coordination around this? Was there anything to that when it comes to, Robinson and everybody else who kind of went ahead with this kind of stuff?
Brandon, can I be completely honest with you?
Yeah.
Here's what's happening. They're just bored, man.
Yeah.
Like, they're tired of all this recruiting. They're tired of all these Zooms. They're tired of all these virtual visits. And in some ways, these top fives are kind of like a deflector shield, to speak Star Wars language like we do sometimes, about, okay, if you're not in the bubble, then, the calls and the weekly calls and the hangout sessions are probably not going to happen. These players want to focus on a certain amount of schools. Brandon, this is really, what could be the dead period inside a dead period? I think it's right now, because nobody really wants to make a decision with visits now. We're in April, so you got all of April and all of May. Nobody wants to make a decision now. And really, in a lot of cases, except for the elite guys, really none of these schools want to make a decision until they get them on campus and can get their in-person evals for a lot of these kids. The thing here is, I laugh at this, Brandon, because as much in my time, how hard it was to get a kid to take an official visit, especially when the rules relaxed where you could have some spring official visits. Everybody only took one or two, and they were saving the big ones for the fall. I mean, Brandon, it is almost like those commercials we saw growing up for your favorite furniture store for the day after Christmas sale or whatever, or that big Black Friday sale where there's a guy in a wheelchair and there's another guy in an arm sling. He's like, I did it 2 years ago. I did it a year ago.
Yeah.
These kids are having a mad dash, like a Black Friday. You insert your favorite retail or electronic store chain giant here to get a $99 Xbox or something. They're going 5 in a row. They're going back to back to back to back. Brandon, there was a tight end for the 2023 class. I don't know if you saw it on social media. You would have probably guffawed if you saw it. He's a highly ranked tight end, and he put out a graphic, an edit of his month of June. And he's visiting like 30 schools, 35 schools in the month of June. He's catching Ohio State and Michigan in the same day. I don't even know if that was possible. He's catching Notre Dame and Michigan State in the same day. I mean, he's got a calendar full of unofficial visits for the month of June, and he's just a 2023 kid. I mean, you want to go overboard once the gates go up, and you can get back on these campuses. I think that's what's going to happen. You'll see some players trickle into G-Day. They'll have to get their own ticket. There'll be a limited sample size of folks that can get tickets anyway to G-Day. But once that June 1 opens up, you remember, Brandon, in the basketball culture or the high school football culture, everybody would have that midnight madness type thing where some renegade, some very hard charging get after him coach. They would have a practice at 12:01 underneath the lights or whatever.
Oh yeah.
I'd imagine that's what June the 1st is going to feel like with these kids coming on campus as much as they can. But Brendan, I can't conceive it. Like a lot of these players have, a lot of these Georgia targets are in Georgia for the first week. Then they go to another school, another school, another school. It's like they're all fearful that the NCAA is going to take away those visits again, or something might happen with the pandemic. So everybody wants to get their 5 in, or at least their 2 or 3 or 4 before June runs out, because it's almost like they're wandering through the desert, starving, like they're in part of the Oregon Trail Man or something like that, trying to avoid cholera and dysentery, and they're trying to find a way to get those visits in because they've been starving for so long for something that resembles anything like that.
I want to finish with this. This is a name that you and I probably haven't talked about enough. There's been so much chatter about him on the social media. I like to talk about the online chatter, things like that. There's clearly been a lot of that around Kamari Wilson, the safety, who I guess has a Georgia visit here coming up pretty soon. He's also been dropping his, list of finalists there as well. You can see that on your screen for those of you watching on video. It seems like for a while he was trending on something a little bit bigger than, list of finalists and things like that. And I don't know. It seems like now maybe he's kind of pumped the brakes a little bit. There's obviously a big-time player, and there's a little bit of, chatter around, Georgia, whatever else. Can you just kind of give us a little bit of a thumbnail with what is going on with Kamari Wilson and maybe what some people thought was going to be more than just, list of finalists or whatever else, and maybe kind of now I don't know, slowing down a little bit? Am I reading all that correctly when it comes to Wilson?
Well, he had the April 1 committing tweet or Instagram post, and really he didn't commit. He didn't even commit to an All-American game, I don't believe, on that day. And then he comes out about a week later with the top 12. I believe it was a top 12. You mentioned a lot of those, Brendan. There's also Jordan Allen with his top 6. Lockdown Allen, one of the best names in any class. Jake Pope had his top 8. Really, I think strong, really unheralded safety out of Buford inside the state of Georgia. But with Wilson, I got to say 2 names. I think it's also Coach Boone and Coach. I think coaches like Scott Cochran and even Will Muschamp are really paying a dividend for what they're doing for Georgia. I think the fact that Muschamp, and you can say whatever you want about Muschamp, man, but the one thing he hasn't been able to do is find the right offensive coordinator, find the right offensive attack, find the right quarterbacks. But you want to talk about a guy that knows how to recruit box players, front 7 players. I mean, it was no secret that I hope it dawned on you, Brandon, but when Georgia kept losing Zach Pickens and Georgia kept losing Jordan Birch and Rick Sandage, all these players to South Carolina, I don't think it was the upgrades they've made to the campus or the International Business School or maybe they decide, speaking of a desert, that Williams-Brice Stadium is a great place to play college football. I think a lot of that had to do with Coach Muschamp and the way he relates to young men and recruits young men, and especially on the defensive side of the ball, especially those guys that will play at the backer position or on the front or along the front lines. He has a definite acumen for that. And Brandon, Kamari Wilson, let me see if I can rev up your taste buds a little bit here. IMG player. He's a 5-star. He's another guy for the safety position. Georgia likely will have, again, a lot of turnover there at safety after this season, and he's another guy. Can you imagine Malachi Starks and Kamari Wilson in the safety class for Georgia in 2022? 5-star safeties. They haven't been too commonplace on the recruiting boards at Georgia, and then they might bring in 2 5-stars in the same class in this 2022 cycle.
That's really something. A big name worth watching, a guy that's, certainly been making a lot of noise on social media as of late, and folks curious to see what happens next with all that. Jeff, thanks so much for being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger here today. We appreciate your recruiting information. We look forward to reading a lot from you in the days to come at DawgNation.com. Seeing you on Wednesdays on Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger, and, of course, getting a chance to chat with you again very soon there as well. Thank you so much, Jeff.
Hey, Brandon, have a good weekend, and happy Masters Tournament to everybody out there. Hope everybody, like myself, hope we all see a great one.
All right, thanks so much, Jeff. Talk to you soon.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
I believe, for those of you scoring at home, that was a Hootie Johnson impersonation from Jeff there. One-time Augusta National Chairman. I guess it was 2 chairmen ago. A little bit of a Hootie Johnson impersonation there from Jeff Sintel there on the way out the door, for those of you who were listening closely and watching closely for all of that. Hey, I'm going to do the SEC Through here, roll through a good bit of content. Before we do that, though, I think one of the great things that's out there are those people who are working hard to give people a second chance. I believe in second chances. I know many of you are thankful in life for the second chances that you've gotten. And I think one of the really cool things with the law right now is there are some doors opened up where people have a chance at a second chance in a way that maybe years prior they wouldn't be able to do. And that's what Second Chance Law is all about. The website to go to, secondchance.law. You can clean up your record. You can erase old convictions. A lot of new Georgia laws allow you for a chance to do that. You can get it restricted off your criminal history. But listen, reading the law is just confusing, right? I mean, these things are written confusing, and so it's kind of hard to follow, but that's what Second Chance Law can do for you. Secondchance.law has made it into a simple free quiz. So when you go to secondchance.law, you can just kind of answer the questions they have for you in the quiz, and that'll lead you to an understanding of kind of what your situation is. It only takes a few minutes to determine your eligibility, and if you're not eligible, the good thing about secondchance.law is they can tell you how you can become eligible, at least potentially, and all that. I'm talking about better employment opportunities, housing opportunities, and just a better, situation for your life in general. That's what Second Chance Law is able to do. One of the partners is a double dog, 2-time graduate of the University of Georgia, former Redcoat, and he's been a DawgNation Daily listener since we really started way back in 2015. So it's good to do business with good people, dog fans, big-time, supporters of DawgNation Daily. I'm incredibly grateful for so many of you who want to step up and help so many of the companies who have been with us here for a long time. My friends at secondchance.law can do that for you. It's also just a great service to the community. Nothing more valuable than a second chance. That's what secondchance.law wants to provide for you. All right, SEC Through here for a moment. I'm going to try to, roll through this. I saw where Dennis Dodd, CBSSports.com, had a very interesting piece up about what he was calling his top coaches under the age of 45. Kirby Smart, no longer under the age of 45, so he's not on the list. But 2 of the SEC names that did make the list, Brian Harsin and Josh Heupel. I guess I didn't quite realize that both those guys were that young, under the age of 45. Maybe I should. I mean, it seems like it wasn't that long ago that Heupel was playing quarterback for Oklahoma. Harsin, much the same way, certainly a young-looking guy. And here's what I was thinking, kind of one thing about Harsin, one thing about Heupel. I'll do Harsin first. One of the things that got Gus Malzahn in trouble at Auburn this past season was when he talked about being 6-4 in a 10-game SEC season. He said, hey, 6 SEC wins in most years, that's a pretty good year. And a lot of Auburn people, and my understanding is a lot of Auburn boosters were really turned off by that. They want the program to aspire to something higher than that, and they thought that Malzahn was settling for less than what they think ought to be the standard there for Auburn. And I can understand why they would feel that way. If a Georgia coach had said that, I would have been mad too. Many of you also would have been. But the truth is that Auburn, with the exception of like 2010, 2013, has kind of, over the course of the last however many years, kind of struggled to be good. They have fought just to simply be good. They haven't really achieved greatness very much. And so now you bring in Brian Harsin as kind of the response to Gus Malzahn not doing more than he did. And the fact of the matter is, I mean, Harsin deserves a lot of credit for being as good as much of a winner as he was at Boise State, as young as he possibly was. I would say that he's a pretty good coaching candidate. I would be very surprised if he's less than good at Auburn. Auburn's, kind of a little bit of a stable, situation in terms of recruiting base, things like that. Harsin, a proven winner. I'd be surprised if he's good. But I'd also be surprised if he's great, given the challenges that exist playing Georgia every year, playing the SEC West schedule every year. It almost seems like what Malzahn said about, hey, in most years, 6 SEC wins is pretty good. Given an 8-game SEC schedule over the course of the next few years, how many times do you reasonably expect Brian Harsin, even as a young kind of impressive coaching prospect, how many times do you expect him to win more than 6 SEC games? I would say the outlook for that's not very good. Then on the other side of this for a moment, the other coach that Dennis Dodd mentioned, CBSSports.com, Josh Heupel. I've told you before, and this is not me just simply throwing red meat out to the audience, giving them what they want to hear. I do believe this is true. Tennessee is a mess right now. To say that it's a dumpster fire is a disrespect to dumpster fires. They have no commits for the class of 2022. They've got 5 players currently suspended. They've got a whole host of big names off last year's roster currently in the transfer portal. One of those guys may be playing against Tennessee for Alabama. I mean, it's as bad as it gets for Tennessee. And all of a sudden you're going to ask this young, relatively inexperienced head coach to be the guy that fixes all that? If I could buy stock in Heupel failing quickly at Tennessee, I would absolutely scarf up as much as I possibly could. That would be my GameStop. That'd be my meme stock. If I could buy stock, if I could short the idea of Josh Heupel at Tennessee, I would do it in a heartbeat. He is too young, too inexperienced, too little pedigree to be the one to solve the problems at Tennessee that have been piling up for year after year after year. That situation there in Knoxville is a mess. Young coach Heupel, but he may have made a mistake by even taking this job, and he may find that out sooner rather than later. A couple of other SEC stories we'll get to kind of quick here. There's a very interesting piece at ESPN.com this week about the kind of the top spring storylines around the world of college football, and one of the things that got mentioned there, and I think this is going to be something we talk about a lot as you head towards the summer, because most of this stuff does not get settled during spring practice. It's the quarterback competitions that are ongoing. And you've got this stuff like nationally when it comes to Ohio State, who, I mean, right now I don't think there's anybody that really has a real strong idea who the replacement for Justin Fields is going to be there at Ohio State. There are options, and Ohio State's typically pretty good offensively, but that's an unknown right now. And here in the SEC, Texas A&M, what's going to happen with Haynes King and Jake Calzada is a fascinating quarterback competition. A&M has its spring game the same day that Georgia does, and we'll see as you kind of head towards that and after that what Jimbo says in regards to which one of these guys may have the lead or anything like that. But some of y'all mock me for thinking the Aggies are going to be good this year, but the honest truth is I do believe that's the case. And if you're looking for a team to be a legit threat to Alabama and joining maybe LSU as making the SEC West deep in a way that it probably hasn't been the last couple of years, boy, what's going to happen there at A&M with that quarterback competition between King and Calzada, I think is a pretty big deal. And I would say that if King can win it, just given the fact that he's a better athlete than Calzada, all of a sudden A&M's chances of beating Alabama, of going head-to-head and winning against the Crimson Tide, I think go up there. Now, he's got to be actually better than Calzada to do so, but King, I think, is a very interesting prospect, and that's potentially a very, very interesting quarterback competition that's about to play out over the course of the next few months. One more thing here as part of our SEC through. I thought this was really interesting from Tom Fornelli at CBSSports.com, even though I don't agree with it at all. But it's representative of an argument that's starting to take shape here a little bit more frequently. So what Tom Fornelli writes, you may think this sounds totally contrarian, but the fact of the matter is I've actually heard a few people echo something similar within the last couple of years. That Tom Fornelli thinks that CBS, that college football should get rid of the college football playoff and go back to only having 2 teams play for the national championship the way that it was back in the BCS era. Now, I would say that I don't agree with this at all. I understand the ways in which the playoff conversation is making the sport worse, and I would say that we've kind of chronicled those around here. The fact of the matter is, rivalry games and good seasons, good January 1st level bowls, they don't get the level of attention they once did because the playoff conversations kind of sucked the life, the oxygen out of the room when it comes to the college football playoff conversation. I totally understand all of that. That makes a lot of sense to me, but that alone is not enough to say the college football playoff is not good or good for college football. There have been a lot of blowouts in the playoff games the last few years, but that to me is not evidence that the playoff shouldn't take place. That to me is evidence that the playoff selection committee's simply choosing the wrong teams. That when you choose teams on simply on the basis of the record they put together in the Power 5 conference, regardless of actually who those teams played to win the games they won, you're going to have a lot of paper tigers. You're going to have a lot of illegitimate games that take place in the college football playoff. And, listen, Georgia fans don't necessarily like to revisit all of this, but it's fair to point out. Best national championship game, best, maybe playoff overall. Go back to 2017 when Georgia wins the thriller against Oklahoma. The national championship game between Georgia and Alabama kind of goes down to the wire. Very, very competitive game. And that was like the most non-traditional of the playoff years, at least more non-traditional than most, in the fact that, Alabama was able to get in as a second SEC team. Maybe unfair to allow them to do that, but that's, kind of the way that went down. That when you do choose four best, not just, four teams from Power 5 conferences who have, pretty records, zeros in the loss column or one in the loss column, and they give a chance at better games. So interesting to note that there is a little bit of movement right now for maybe, kind of a dissatisfaction with the college football playoff. I'm not one of those people. I'd be okay with actually expanding the playoff to 8 teams, but not everybody's in love with the way the playoff is changing the sport right now. At least worth paying attention on that will make that your SEC 3. And I have to confess something here as we wrap up today's show. I am totally behind on Golden Shoe Gator Hater Roll Call. I have really just sort of screwed that up here this week. I've been running around doing 1,000 things. My family's been on a spring break this week, so I've been kind of doing that. So a couple of things here real quick. First of all, as it says there on your screen, make sure you subscribe to the DawgNation YouTube page. That's a great way to get all the great content from DawgNation. But I actually want to do this, if you don't mind. I want to give a golden shoe today to the Diamond Dogs. What an incredible performance for UGA baseball last night. Kumar Rocker, just a very impressive player. Vanderbilt, number 1 team in the country. Georgia absolutely ran them out of the stadium, out of the ballpark last night in Nashville, a game many of you watched on the SEC network. So for beating the team in gold, we'll give a gold shoe to the Diamond Dogs here today. Great job there on that. By the way, speaking of those lousy, stinking Gators, 204 days from right now, Georgia goes back to Jacksonville. We think gets revenge. Have a great weekend, everybody. We'll see you back Monday. DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. And on video, time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down. Appreciate all of you being here. Of course, R.S. Andrews. The R.S. stands for Rapid Service. That means they show up on time, do the work that's promised. The price is promised. I have loved having my air conditioning on the last couple of nights. It's been warm, and I like to have it nice and cold and, cool in the home when I'm trying to sleep. And many of you are much the same way. So get your system tuned back to factory fresh specs if you're worried about it making its way through the spring. And then the summer, when those air conditionings are really working overdrive, you get a chance to do all of that. So let's pop over here. Let's get some of your comments. I'll do YouTube first today, and then we'll do Facebook after that. We probably won't go super long because we do have a whole bunch of stuff going on today. So we'll do a few comments, and then we'll let you all get going on your weekend here right now. Anikimi Yodoko, and I apologize if I mispronounce your name, says, how is Texas recruitment so far under Steve Sarkisian? That's a good question. I haven't heard a ton about the recruiting work so far. I do know that's one of the issues that Sarkisian was hired to fix, just given the fact that, you look at the way in which Texas recruiting kind of regressed. And I thought that Bud Elliott had a really good piece at 247sports.com this week about how much winning matters in terms of producing a really good recruiting class. And there was kind of some, unclear takeaways from some of that all the way around. But one of the things that you did kind of see as kind of a clear trend is that, hey, when you're hired as kind of a hotshot coach, there's a lot of energy around you to begin with. But if you don't back that up with wins, eventually people kind of start looking for other places to go. Players start looking for other places to go. In the case of Tom Herman, he kind of ran into some of that, I would say, at Texas. And so clearly that's what Sarkisian's been hired to try to fix all the way around. But I don't know they've necessarily had big win there on that front as of yet. Mike D says, what about the Lady Dogs tennis team winning the SEC? Mike, I should give credit that there as well. Admittedly, tennis is not one of those sports that I follow quite as closely as I probably should. I know there's a great tradition of that at Georgia, and obviously, going back to the terrific NCAA events that have taken place there in Athens over the years. It's probably a sport I should follow a little bit more closely than I do. HR picking stuff, no fan of Vanderbilt. Yeah, it's kind of funny. For those of you that follow college baseball, and that is a sport that I like, but for those of you that follow college baseball, pound for pound, per capita speaking here, I'd put the hatred that exists for Vanderbilt baseball up against the hatred that any SEC team deals with. Now, I say pound for pound because obviously there are fewer people that care about baseball. But everyone who cares about SEC baseball hates Vanderbilt. You don't have to – there is not any deviation from that feeling whatsoever. For the people who care about baseball, the hatred that exists for Vanderbilt is as intense as it exists anywhere. There's a lot more people who care about football, so therefore a lot more people hate teams like Alabama, teams like that. I guess Kentucky gets some of that in basketball. But the intensity of the people who care about college baseball and their feelings for Vanderbilt, it is unmatched. Unmatched. Michael Webb, pretty funny on the idea of the double dog dare. I like that. That's actually a good thing, Michael. We should. That's a pretty good marketing slogan, Michael. You should get into that. That's pretty good. Frank Patterson says, I'd be surprised if Mims is out of the gate better than Broderick or Tate Ratledge. I mean, Ratledge is one of those guys you seem like you hear a good bit of chatter about lately. That's kind of a good thing. Seems like it's a little bit quiet on the Broderick Jones front, which I'd prefer maybe not be the case. Here's the thing, though, about a guy like Mims. I mean, Mims may be as good a prospect along the offensive line as Georgia signed, but this is just not 2017 anymore. In 2017, I mean, Georgia's SEC championship playoff appearance was, in many ways, part of the bedrock of that was, hey, thankfully Andrew Thomas was good enough to start as a true freshman. Had he not been, Georgia would have been in some real trouble. This is just not a team that needs saving by freshmen as much as it did before. Now, there's also a chance this offensive line this upcoming season may not be quite as good as Georgia's was in 2017, a unit that turned out to be pretty good. But this is not one of those teams where you just immediately expect, freshmen just to kind of come in and save the day the way that maybe you once would. Mims may be a huge prospect, but I guess I'd still be pretty surprised if he's starting right out of the block. DMart42 says he thinks that Ratledge might be a guard in college. Maybe so. I mean, and look, these guards are getting paid these days. I mean, I think it used to be a thing where, like, I've joked with y'all before that there's like a premium version of every position group, cornerback in the secondary, tackle in the offensive line, and everybody kind of wants to be that premium version. If you can be an outside linebacker, that's what you want to be, more so than maybe, a hand-on-the-ground defensive end. But, I mean, we live in a day and age now where, you got guards in the NFL just absolutely, whatever the kids say, get in the bag. There are all kinds of guards these days get in the bag. That is not seemingly a problem anymore. G. Grace Bama Boy says, who's the backup? Is it Beck or is it Brock? So, G, if you were listening to yesterday during the regular show, just given the fact that Kirby Smart was describing, how quickly Brock Vandagriff is progressing, but also acknowledging how far a guy like that has to come. I think the idea of maybe Vandagriff being the primary backup near the beginning of the season on the basis of just that statement alone, which is obviously, a small bit of information, I would say that Vandagriff not likely the primary backup to begin the season. But the name that you don't mention that I think is probably worth considering there, Stetson Bennett started games in the SEC, and, Bennett had some nice moments. That's a guy that could be valuable for Georgia if, I always, for some reason, say it this way. Like if JT Daniels were to lose his helmet and have to, come off the field, chin strap comes off or something like that, having a guy that started games at the SEC level as a backup is potentially pretty valuable there. Sounds like Carson Beck's had a pretty good spring, at least the best that I can tell, which is, I think really good stuff. Here's the one thing, though, about Vandagriff that I will say. This is one of those things, and you see this with, like, young people and a lot of things in life, and I'm thinking in football may not be any different here. So Vandagriff shows up, oh my gosh, what is it? Kirby Smart calls it rat trap, and oh my gosh, you're looking around like there's so much to learn, so much to get acquainted with. As players have told us, just getting familiar with the bus schedule and things like that, how you get to class is kind of a big deal. So you've got all this information, and I'm sure if you're Brock Vandagriff, it must feel like the first few weeks you're just kind of slogging through all of this, and you're forgetting as much as you're learning, and it just must be really, really hard. But when you're as talented as Vandagriff is, arm, athleticism, all of that, there are going to be these moments when you have these exponential leaps, right? So it's like you're just barely kind of chugging along and you barely keeping your head above water, but then you're going to have these huge strides forward. And so, Vandagriff may be behind the other guys right now, but just giving his overall talent, he's going to catch up quickly, I'm predicting, just on the basis of kind of what he brings to the table there. So that's something to keep in mind. Long answer to a short question. I'd favor Bennett to be the backup right now. I'd probably put Beck a little bit ahead of Vandagriff, but as Vandagriff gets more and more comfortable, let's see how that overall talent starts to show up for him. Let's see a couple more here. Thomas Tyson also saying some nice things about Carson Beck. Yeah, so we'll see how that goes. Green Soldier, let's see what his question is. He says Beck's a serious talent. Green Soldier also reminding us that Vandergraft's also coming back from an injury. That's a fair point there as well. Johnny Lester says Carson Beck's definitely our number 2 quarterback. He is playing great. I mean, the one thing I'm just going to be really careful of on stuff like that is to say anyone's playing great on the basis of somebody else's eyewitness account, if that makes sense. There's a very good chance that he is going to be a very good quarterback. But my own personal opinions, I'm going to just be very slow to take them as my own based on what somebody else says that they saw. I'm just going to be a little bit more hesitant on that. Not to say that he's not, but my own personal evaluation on that's going to be a little bit different. Green Soldier says, if and when A&M becomes the second best team in the West, when and how do you think they do it? Will they ever beat the best out of the West? So could they beat Alabama? I think they could. And as far as how do they become the second best team in the West? I would say you do what you did last year, which is, you played pretty good defense with Mike Elko, and you really ran the ball really well. I mean, that's the one thing that I think people have, maybe not given Jimbo enough credit for is he's introduced the running game into College Station in a way that it didn't really exist before. And so, Kellen Mond, who seems to be climbing up draft boards right now, but probably did not have a great college career. What if all of a sudden we're talking about good quarterback play to go along with stout running game and, very good defense under Mike Elko, a guy who I think is one of the top coordinators in the conference. That to me is the kind of recipe for a team that could beat Alabama. Now, they're also going to get pushed by LSU, and actually LSU A&M's become a little bit of a rivalry, which is kind of fun to see. But I think it's just very clear. There are 3 teams in the West, head and shoulders above everybody else. And then there's, you talk about the overall depth of the division. It is clearly a top-heavy depth on the kind of the front half there. I think it's going to be hard for Auburn, the Mississippi schools, even Arkansas. And I liked Sam Pittman a year ago, but I think it's going to be very hard on all 4 of those schools, just on the basis of how good I think those top 3 schools are going to be. Matthew McGay, he says, see, I knew I was going to get in trouble for this. This is really the thing that I do. I feel like I take a lot of comments on both comment sections, but I do. I think it's fair to say stay stuck on one comment section a little too long. I do that. So Matthew very astutely calling me out on that. Steve Highland also mocking me for Aggie talk. In fairness, though, I was asked a question about that, Steve. In fairness. Mike Anderson also not happy about that either. Gary and Christian Gulasano says, when is the West ever not top-heavy? Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that I think is really hard for those teams at the bottom of the division. When you have to play those really good teams each and every year, it's just hard to ever have a pretty record when you're playing those. Kevin Cook says, why wasn't there a cover 4 last night? So we're kind of, for now, sort of, and we haven't really, I guess, announced this. Maybe we should just announce it. But we're kind of doing kind of an every other week schedule for right now. Obviously, that won't be the case as you head a little closer to the start of the regular season. But for now, we're kind of doing an every other schedule. Just different people have been doing different things. We will be back and doing a live, or I should say a video show next week. But we've been kind of doing an every other week type schedule. We probably just should have told you that's what we're doing, but that's generally what we're doing. Matthew, I'm not going near that one. Very funny joke, but I'm not going to go near that one. That is funny, though. Isaac Cruz says, with all these injuries, anyone looking at the strength and conditioning coach? So, Isaac, I've made my opinion on this pretty clear, is that I thought it was dumb when Bama fans were doing that with their injuries back when Scott Cochran was special team, I should say, strength and conditioning coordinator, well before Cochran we had any idea that he was coming to UGA. I was critical of Bama fans for wanting to blame their injuries on strength and conditioning. I think the way in which Nick Saban has given voice to that conspiracy a little bit in the post-Scott Cochran world, I think is embarrassing. I think it's beneath his dignity. I just don't believe that there's anything to look at as terms of why Georgia has had a couple of injuries. And by the way, for most of these injuries, with the exception of the Pickens injury, the Burton, the Arian Smith has turned out not to be quite as serious as it could have been. So I understand where the question comes from, but for me, I just think injuries are part of football, and it's just, I think, sometimes bad luck, and I don't look for any kind of reason beyond that because I simply just don't think there is one. I understand what the question is. Tennille Calvino also asking about cover 4. Yeah, so we've been kind of doing every other week on that. We'll be back doing that again this week there as well. A couple more here. Joey Waddell says, do we have enough to field a team in basketball? Many of you saw that Tamani Kamara has announced his transfer now to Dayton. And, yeah, I mean, Georgia's had a lot of transfers off the basketball team. And as I've told you before, I simply don't know enough about the situation to know if this is a issue that's specific to Georgia or if this is an issue related to by the time you get to the high point, there are going to probably be 2,000 names in the basketball transfer portal. And, that's a level of instability that I don't think is good for college athletics all the way around. I've told you that before. I'm fairly conservative. I'm talking about in the literal sense when it comes to, these kinds of things. Traditional, I guess, is more the word that I'm looking for. Fairly traditional when it comes to, those kinds of things. And listen, I know how many transfers Baylor had, and they used them to win a national championship. There's a way to use the portal to your advantage. I do get that, but man, the instability out there I don't think is good for college sports overall, and obviously Georgia's dealing with that there too. And I guess someone else other than me is going to have to say, is this a specific issue related to Georgia, or is this just the general issue that everybody in college, basketball is kind of dealing with? Matt Talley says he's going to step in to fill the void when we're not doing Cover 4 Live. Jermaine King reminded us that Terrence Edwards said stop freaking out about the injuries. I think that's really good. Brian Whitehead, I'm not aware of that. I can't really speak to that. So I'm not quite sure about that. Georgia is, and I think it's prerogative to do so, fairly private about, things related to that. So if there was something like that, Georgia would probably handle that in-house there as well. So I can't really add much to that discussion. Joel Moody says, are we far along enough for you to name your under-the-radar, up-and-coming offensive and defensive players? So I think the trick with something like this, Joel, is, and we'll get ready to kind of wrap up after this, I think one of the kind of the tricks related to this is it's sort of hard to know how under the radar is defined around a place like Georgia. For instance, a guy that you would typically think of as under the radar would be like a receiver like Adonai Mitchell, someone who's not a big-time recruit necessarily and didn't get as much attention around signing day as some of the other guys that Georgia brought in. But think about all the Adonai Mitchell content that's been out there as of late. We did a whole thing with Terrence Edwards on Mitchell yesterday. And, he's been written about at DawgNation.com. Kirby Smart himself has talked about him. I think the trick here with the under-the-radar stuff is it's kind of hard to find someone that actually fits the criteria of being under the radar, just given how expansive the radar around Georgia football kind of is. So let me see if I can do it this way. Actually, let's think about this for a little bit longer, because, the names I would mention now are the same ones that you've kind of heard mentioned, kind of all over the rest of the place. As I said off the top of the program today, it's almost at the point now where people are so fixated on the issues with the secondary that what's right with the Georgia defense, all those 5 stars that could be, kind of the nucleus of the front 7, it's almost like we've obscured them because the issues with the secondary. I understand where that comes from, but at this point in time, I'm not quite so sure that guys like Dean and Nolan Smith and Trayvon Walker don't, qualify as under the radar, just given the amount of discussion that exists about other guys and other things. So let's put a pin in that for right now, but I think it's a very interesting question. Somebody asking me about an exclusive chat. So here's what I want to do, and maybe one of y'all can help me, and if you can, hit me up on Twitter. I'm meaning this totally serious. So I want to do something on Clubhouse, but I'm not cool enough to be currently on Clubhouse, and you can't get on Clubhouse. Many of you know what this is. You can't get on Clubhouse unless somebody invites you. So if y'all want to do an exclusive conversation, I'd love to do this. And I want to do it on Clubhouse because it just seems really fun. Clubhouse, for those of you not aware, is like a platform where it's all audio. It's not video. It's what we're doing now. But instead of me having to read your comments, you can actually speak and we can actually have a conversation. I think we can have up to 5,000 people in the room. Can somebody invite me to Clubhouse? And if you can, we're going to see if we can do something over there on Clubhouse. So if one of y'all is watching right now that's on Clubhouse, invite me to Clubhouse if you don't mind, and we'll do that. Joel Moody mentioning Channing Tindall on defense. Now that's an under the radar name and potentially a really good one. Joel, that's a really good chance. Really good chance. Matt Talley says I'd pay $10. So that's one of the things I've also kind of wondered about there as well. It's like, I don't care about the money part of it, but with, like, y'all know what Cameo is, where like you can pay people to kind of, do things for you. I've kind of wondered about like a Cameo thing, kind of like that. I think that's kind of funny. All right. Anything else before we go? Dog Fan 3, and Jay Shipe's kind of wondering about Clubhouse. DMart42 there as well. So yeah, Clubhouse is kind of a new social platform type thing. Let me, anything else before we get ready to go? I don't think so. Let's get ready to go for now. All right. Hey, thanks all of you for being here. DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger. Also, make sure you check out the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Get ready to follow big Masters coverage of the weekend. It's one of the things that AJC always does really well is that Masters coverage, have for a number of years, going back to the great Furman Bisher days and continuing on for now there as well. Just really good stuff all the way around when it comes to that. Also, a lot of news related to the coronavirus, restrictions have been eased. Folks trying to get back to normal, healthy and safe. Of course, the big goal related to all of this. So check out all of that. Plus, fun stuff going on the weekend. I guess I wasn't quite aware of this. Braves home opener, by the way, too. Truist Park on that front. We are really kind of getting some live music coming back, things like that. For those of you who are looking for those signs that, hey, college football may be heading towards normal for this fall, start paying attention to some of the music acts that are starting to come back around and, do some shows, socially distant still for now, but do some shows here in the Atlanta area this spring. There's some of that kind of stuff going on. So AJC.com, get all of that online there, and you can find out about everything else there as well. All right. Big thanks to all my friends at R.S. Andrews for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric. Story after story, they've been delivering smiles, and they can deliver a smile for you. But you got to find them online at rsandrews.com. Great weekend, everybody. See you back here Monday. G-Day week is next week. It begins Monday. DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. We'll see you then.